So having someone in this middle space that can play the translator
Mhm.
or devil's advocate for the requests that are going to go to engineering or the limitations that are going to be presented back to design, and they can kind of do that translation and buffering and bring up those concerns in a meeting to be more realistic about our time estimates.
Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I'm your host, Carl Leduc, and today I'm joined by John Diaz. John is a senior technical game designer at EA in Seattle, working on the Frostbite game engine. His 15-year-long game dev journey has taken him through opportunities at Midway, Rockstar, Warner Brothers Games, and Amazon Web Services. Today, we'll be talking about his role as a technical game designer and how this role is evolving in the industry today. Some advice for breaking into AAA studios, building strong talks for conferences, and more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 2 of season 4 of the Zero to Play podcast. All right, welcome, John, to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Carl, this is fantastic, man. Great to be here. Season 4, lucky number 2.
That's right. Yep. So you are because the first episode is me just kind of talking to the camera, giving an update. So you're the actual leading episode of season 4, which I'm really happy about. I think you have some incredible experience. I think you can navigate complex topics, and you've done many conference talks and things like that. So I'm really grateful to have you on the show and to be able to ask you some questions about your job and what you do. You have a podcast called The Out of Play Area. So if anyone's listening wants more content on game dev journeys and how people got into the industry, they should definitely check that out. But I do want to keep this conversation focused on you and your role as a senior technical game designer, which I think I personally have a lot of questions about. I had some misconceptions when I was researching you and your role. I definitely had misconceptions as to what that role actually meant. So I think what I'd like to do to start off the conversation is, could you explain some of the challenges that you encounter on a day-to-day basis as a senior technical game designer working on a game engine? Like, is obviously navigate around NDAs as much as you can, but is there any insight you can give as to like what you kind of deal with on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. Yeah. We coming out swinging hard out of the gate. I love it. So what I would say, first off, 2 parts. I would say that technical designers, as I know them, generally existed at the project level.
Mm-hmm.
And over the years, and I'll explain why in a bit, I found myself trying to push to exist more at the studio level or on a core tech team, because I felt like I could have more of an impact towards what the goal of the role is.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll take a step back then. Technical designers just kind of were created out of necessity, or didn't even really exist by role. I'll tell you a story. When I first broke in at Midway Austin, we were operating on a Frankenstein version of Unreal 3, building Black Cider 51. It was a first-person shooter, and we were all game designers, quote unquote, right? We're doing at the time, 2008, around there. So we're doing everything, right? We're doing level layout, we're doing scripting and what was called Kismet back in the day. You're hooking in animations as they come off the press. You're hooking in dialogue cues. You're controlling the level, streaming in and out. You're even calling functions to give achievements and trophies and things like that, right? Like all that stuff. So pretty awesome at that time. And we had one technical designer servicing a group of, I think it was like 10 or so game designers.
Wow, it's quite a bit.
Right. So, that gentleman named Rusty Semsrott, he was in everything, right? He was kind of in all the meetings. He was the person to go to for anything. And obviously, or that was something that was easy to kind of fall enamored for. Be like, wow, I want to be someone that's that needed or that in the know of things. And so shadowed him at every opportunity I got. And eventually when the studio went through, we went through like kind of, we got a second project running at the time after Black Site shipped. There was two projects running, and an opportunity became open to serve as the technical designer for the project that was missing one called Criminal at the time. And by shadowing him enough and kind of emulating what he did, I kind of fooled everyone and said, "Hey, John, you'd make a good technical designer. Let's give it a shot." And basically, I mean, all that allowed me to do was kind of step away from the exclusive, level layout and triggering content and AI spawn points and controlling all that gameplay logic, and taking kind of a slightly higher level or 10,000 foot overview of like, okay, at a bigger level, what are the designers doing and how are they doing it? And where are the bottlenecks and where are the points that lead to a lot of human error that can be systematized or automated or bulletproofed and wrapped around with some like basic logic checks or something like that, and worry about that with a group of engineers dedicated to that thing, right? As opposed to how we were operating kind of just like whatever problem or whatever fire there was to solve that day in your level or something like that. So just a little bit of that.
Yeah. So from my experience in the industry, a lot of game designers aren't programmers. They love documentation. They love creating like prototypes and things like that, but it's not like advanced. So, and I would kind of imagine like tech designers coming from a programmer like background. So I think it's interesting that you kind of start off in game design, and I do want to get into your entrance into the industry and like where you studied, but we can touch on that later. But I guess that is interesting. And would you say you had the experience of a senior programmer at that moment when you're a game designer, or did you find you had to really learn a lot of how systems worked, really getting deeper into the engine while you were working as a game designer, or were they kind of blurred at that point?
Yeah, that's a good call. So I definitely would not call myself senior anything back in those days for sure. And my academics were probably 80% programming, 20% design. So that allowed me to kind of bring that thinking to a lot of the common game design problems. And totally respect for what I call true game designers, right? That live kind of in that paper space and even at the spreadsheet level and hardcore flow charts and things like that. Like, I really value those people so that I can stick to more of like the nuts and bolts, like implementation and things like that at a higher level. So when so to just kind of bringing that logic background into, and part of it is definitely the tool set. I think the tool set allowed for that, right? Like the way that Unreal then gave you access to this visual scripting language that was meant to be more accessible to any developer, right? So they wouldn't have to kind of be bogged down into like Visual Studio or any text-based scripting language. And nowadays, it seems like the lines are very blurred, right? Like the way that Unity kind of expects you to jump into C#, right? And Unreal essentially is kind of like Unreal 4's blueprints is really kind of like C# with boxes and strings, right? Like, so I really like to see how the industry is kind of shifting to just kind of like embrace the generalist, right? And kudos to the indie people that I think make great developers, especially when you bring in a AAA and they're kind of like, I can do everything. And you try to pigeonhole them like, no, you're going to be a combat designer or you're going to be an economy designer. They're like, okay, but I can do more,
Yeah. So Frostbite is EA's proprietary game engine, and I heard you mention in a talk that it's a node-based scripting tool. And could you elaborate a bit more on, because that's is that similar to what blueprints are in Unreal? Am I understanding that correctly? It's the same node-based, or could you elaborate a bit more on what that is and how that helps the designers, do their job?
Sure. So Frostbite is EA's proprietary engine technology, right? You'll see the little like fragmented icy handprint logo whenever Battlefield splashes up, or Madden, or FIFA, or the last Mass Effect, things like that. And so I can't get too much into the specifics
Of
of the
course.
technology, it being proprietary, but I will say this, right? Like, in an effort to bring on talent from schools that have this training and just have this expectation, like, I'm curious, in your experience, when you run into fresh talent,
Mm.
I think they kind of come with the perception of like, ooh, I'm going to work in Blueprint or C Sharp or something like that. So if the expectation is node based scripting languages, nodes being, your boxes, and scripting implying that, your logic is, instead of delimited by white space or semicolons, right? It's
Hmm.
all those little pins or nodes that connect to other nodes to run your logic.
Hmm.
So ours, we have a version of that in our tool set, because it's hard to argue with that accessibility, right? For anybody coming in from any other tool set, right? To kind of,
Mm.
the fact that it's more visual as opposed to text based, I think does lower that barrier of entry, and makes you feel a little bit more confident
Hmm.
to step into the unknown and try to experiment with what's available for you. And at the end of the day, that's really what kind of leads to really great prototyping and experiences, right? Kind of those happy accidents.
It's really interesting. So and feel free to, like, if this is going too deep, let me know. But when you're working on a core tech team, and you're working on games like Madden and then Battlefield, that are two completely different genres that have different kind of performance requirements and limitations, how do you develop like the core technology? Like, how do you make decisions for such a wide varying tool set that's going to be used for so many different genres of games? Like, what do you have any kind of like pillars or principles that you operate to help make sure that you're taking into account all these different types of projects that are being like this engine is being used for?
Mhm. So now you know why I accepted the offer. For someone who has existed at the project layer, and little by little, as working at different studios that have multiple projects, be like, oh wow, I tend to feel like I'm rebuilding the wheel for every project I'm on. Why don't I kind of build it one time and try to encompass the different projects that we serve? And so finally, that's where being working at the engine level came up, and my first shot was on AWS for their Lumberyard engine, which is a Crytek fork, which is now Open 3D.
Hmm.
I think they call it Open 3D engine.
Hmm.
Um, and what was interesting with that one was, yeah, there's Amazon internal game studios, but then there's also this massive indie hobbyist public space that downloads the engine and is trying to spin things up,
Hmm.
that we were trying to support and empower and work with universities and such, which was just massive. When you try to service a user base that big,
Mm.
and we're a small team, it was a lot to bite off. What I loved about coming over to EA on Frostbite's team is like internal, first party, proprietary, like very nice
Mm.
finite space to operate in. Like, hey,
Mm.
we have racing games, we have sports games, we have shooters, third person action RPGs. I can focus now, right? I can kind of
Yeah.
try to attack this. Um, and so that's exactly what lured me over, right? And I
Mm.
found, like, I feel like I found my happy space. Not going to get into the specifics of the challenges we face on those projects, but if we can speak a little bit more generalized, is, hey, you're going to look at a game that has 10v10 in a static level first, all intents and purposes, right? Like you're not like streaming anything. You kind of have a stadium, then you may have like a dynamic time of day system, and then you got to have really crazy lighting. And I think pretty intense animation freedom, right? Like to get that fidelity of all these interactions that happen with so many different pawns in the world colliding and running and trying to follow a path. And then on the other end of that, you can look at maybe a game like a racing game that has probably no population, no ambient population, a pretty static environment, operating at high speeds, right? So streaming is a very real thing in that environment. But the fidelity of the graphics kind of all rely on kind of your car, right? The lighting, the speed. And then on the other end, you can have like a Twitch-based, massive, pretty decent size online shooter. And that has a bunch of requirements. So how do you tackle a tool set to service all those things, right? And breaking apart any tool set, right? You have your renderer. You probably will have some type of streaming layer. You have your animation language, whatever that may be. You have your networking layer, probably an input layer. What else might I be missing? Oh, and then kind of like your, I throw that probably on as a abstract layer between your renderer. But yeah, totally right. Like there's a whole world of people that can just, if you let them write shaders all day, that's all they want to do, right? Like I want to make the water look awesome, I want to make the clouds look awesome, I want to make my hair. Yeah, for sure. I wish, I think in another life I would have gone more deep into like technical art and
well, that's kind of what I felt as well. Like I spoke to Lyndon Reed in a previous episode, who's a graphics programmer, and I talked to him about the difference between like a technical programmer, like a tech artist, and a graphics programmer, and what that is. And there's so many of these roles that kind of crossover depending on the studio and the projects, and I kind of felt that way with being a senior technical game designer, like that kind of crossed a lot of departments. One question I want to ask is, what if you were to walk into a studio, what kind of tells would you suggest? If so, say the studio doesn't have a senior technical game designer, or just like any technical game designers, what kind of situations would you see that would make you feel that this team needs a technical game designer? Like talking between departments is always a communication problem. For me, working in production, that's what I do on a daily basis, is communicate between the departments. And once you have a technical minded person in the design team, it helps a lot of the decisions being made. But in your perspective, like what is like a big like bottleneck that you think a technical game design role can solve in a project? If anyone listening is thinking about if they need one, like how can you provide some insight on that?
Yeah, Carl, that's a great question, because right, like in an ideal world, we can do all the jobs, right? And then you just have a team of like superstars that can do anything, like I don't know, mercenary team or something. But the more that you can help people concentrate or focus on the thing, on their superpowers, and bringing that to the table, right? I think usually it better serves the project at hand. And some of the conversations I've gotten into recently about this do revolve in the space of, if a designer knew the technical implications of some of the requests they tend to make, and an engineer knew some of the creative boundaries presented with some of the decisions they make whenever they're putting something together, they would both come at it with a very different perspective, and they would make very different decisions. And when you leave those two disciplines to have to do the mental gymnastics for that, most of the time they prefer to just, hey, I'm just going to do what I'm really good at and put, bang out an awesome design. And I'm going to do what I'm really good at, is bang out an efficient algorithm or implementation using our technology to service what this design doc is requesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what that could end up being, right, if they don't stick to that extreme of like, I'm just going to focus on the thing I want to do, right? As humans, we'll empathize more of like, okay, the first go around of this implementation was super limiting, or it didn't come across clear, or it was buggy, or had to go a lot of back and forth and a lot of cycles. Let me sit with the other discipline and understand what they're looking for, right? Either which way you want to slice that up. So you're kind of doing two things, or game development, right? Like, it's the nature of game development, is how we operate. These are kind of the untracked tasks or time. Like, I know when I am asked by an awesome producer to time box or estimate something, it's very rare that I factor in the time spent at someone else's desk or someone else's machine, or in a meeting trying to work through some of the things we didn't foresee.
Yeah.
So having someone in this middle space that can play the translator or devil's advocate for the requests that are going to go to engineering, or the limitations that are going to be presented back to design, and they can kind of do that translation and buffering and bring up those concerns in a meeting to be more realistic about our time estimates, or bring up maybe a few alternatives and to see where we push and pull. Like, can we make this more designer friendly, yet still be super optimal or scale well? Is what this role is about. And so when you're trying to figure out like, hey, how do we even know we need one? We're fine without, we're doing fine as we are. I would say, do you have anybody that can be in that middle space between both disciplines and be that voice of kind of I don't know, logical, creative reasoning at the same time, if that even makes sense, if that's even a thing.
I think it's all about perspective, coming with a different skill set and a different perspective on different problems. And I think that one thing when I was researching you that I really admired was your passion for having diverse and inclusive teams. And I almost feel like that same mindset of having someone that's technically skilled amongst the designers is the same logic that you would apply when talking about having a diverse team. You want to have multiple people from different cultures, different backgrounds that can bring their perspective, so that at the end of the day it's a fully encompassed decision that's been made. Do you agree with that? And I love that I've been able to loop that into this part of the conversation.
That's amazing. Yeah. Hell yeah, Carl. Hell yeah. I don't think I've ever put those two together, but you're absolutely right. It's for that exact reason. Like, you just bring somebody from a different background, i.e. maybe a programming background, and you throw them into a designer's playground and see what they'll produce or the things that they'll worry about, versus someone from a design background and throw them into kind of an engineering, probably library-esque architecture laid out, like cleanly filed long columns of 10-story high bookshelves neatly organized or something like that, right? Like, I think I love that the way you've kind of put that together is totally that, right? For the same reason that having people from a different part of the world, different background, different upbringing, different perspective, and putting that with other people that look at things differently, you just have better coverage, right? You just kind of account for things that other people aren't really thinking about, right? It's the same reason that you rarely have one studio or one game team stick together for that long making the same thing, right? And a lot of the reasons that these other studios spin off is because just being able to grab talent that's made different games and bring that together, right? Like, to be like, ooh, hey, you have experience building open world shooters, and you have experience doing puzzle games, you have
Mm,
experience doing VR, right? Like, what can we make, right?
mm.
Kind of thing. It's amazing. I really love. That's exciting to hear you put that spin on
Mm.
it.
Totally. One selfish question I want to ask, and there's a few things that I want to cover. So apologies if I'm kind of skipping over things quite quickly. But
No, you're awesome.
one selfish question I want to ask is just because I work in production and I aspire to be a great producer one day. The question is, what has been your
Because you're not today.
yeah, like I'd love to know how you best how your experiences have been best aligned with the producer. Like how have you worked the best with your production team, and what can you kind of share with how a production team can operate in the most efficient way without them kind of getting in the way?
Yeah, Carl, I think I want you to chime in a little bit here. I don't want it to be just my perspective, because what I would say is the favorite things that I love to offload to my producer is a lot of the things that I suck at, and I don't do well, and I purposely don't spend any time trying to get better at, is all the task tracking and spreadsheeting and Jira, and Outlook management and all that, right? Like I spend more time in there these days, right? Because as we all do from working from home, so we're forced to get better with this
Mm,
stuff. Uh, but I I always lean on my producer to put me in contact with people that I might not be considering, that may need to know about this thing that's coming, right? Like I think as you go on, as you get closer with a team, everybody knows everybody and who the
mm,
point person is. But as teams grow and new people come on, I like to lean on my producer or work side by side in tandem, right? To be like, hey, this conversation about these things, and I'm thinking of these people, help me make this an efficient use of all these people's time, right? Because you
yeah,
figure every person you add to a meeting, the dollar figures just kind of shoot up, right? There things they could be doing instead. So,
yeah.
and being able to be very realistic about, okay, I think this will be an hour meeting. Can we do this in 30 minutes?
Mm,
And can we make sure that we hit the necessary things? And if anything needs to go after that, that we can break off into smaller one-on-ones and stuff that
mm,
not everybody needs to be here for. And then all the necessary tasking and ticketing and making sure the names are there and the watches are there and the approvers are there and the comment and all the information is where we need it. I like to be in, I like to organize Confluence pages and add links to all the documents, but I find that when you have a producer be that voice of like, if I send an email versus a producer sends an email, I guarantee you that producer's email will be more read and
yeah.
like, okay, this is the source of truth kind of thing. So
Okay.
I think that's what I tend to lean on them for
Well, that's a
and
good sign.
appreciate them.
Yeah, it's a good sign that your production department is that source of truth. And this is an interesting thing that I've been thinking about a lot, just as my journey in production is what is production theater, like creating processes that are just for the sake of processes,
Production
because it
theater.
it feels it feels like it's organized, but it really isn't. Like it, you might set up,
Puppeteering.
yeah, kind of, and that's a I think a big topic, because as I go through my journey, I think that that's the risk that I run. If I over organize or create processes that aren't actually efficient, and then realizing that and then stopping it. But it's so yeah, like that's kind of the extreme of production that you don't want to get to. You want to kind of have that nice balance where as people are being onboarded, the processes are evolving with the team, and you're not kind of locking onto processes that used to work 6 months ago but don't
Yeah.
work anymore. So it's definitely a cool problem. Like, and I love focusing on communication and things like that, and helping
Yes.
people like yourself do your job the best and the most efficient way. So, because I'm not an artist, I'm not a programmer, I'm not a designer, but I love games and I love making games, and I love that I found a way to be passionate about it with a team of really talented developers.
Dude, that's fantastic because I do want to mention how I think in my head, in my little reality, I feel like no one should be better at the game than the designer. But I think what I've seen in reality is definitely the QA testers end up being kind of the best. But close second, if not like right next to them, are the producers. Like the producers play the game like a lot, and they tend to be in the know more of like what's coming in and what's going and stuff like that. So it's a little unfair, but I respect that.
Yeah, I think it's because, well, I started off in QA and then made my way into production. I think in the production department, there's just a lot of downtime, and playing the game is a good way to distract yourself from over communicating things and kind of getting in the way. Sometimes you need to just take a step back and let people work on what they've got on their plate. And I've found that playing the game is a great way to just get into that state of flow doing something else until someone reaches out to you with a fire that they need solved. So that might be why. But
that explains it.
That
explains it, because that's totally a great use of time. Like I think, and there's not enough developers playing the game. At first, when I first broke in, Carl, I was shocked at the number of people that don't play the game. I'm like, hold on, man, your job is to make games and you're not playing the game. Explain that to me. Right. And then as the years go on and the problems, spaces that you're in, and the things you have to cover, I understand. I'm more empathetic now, but I'll be damned if I'm not at least like top 10% at the game on my team.
In today's supporter segment, I'd like to bring attention to Logitech Gaming, and Blue Microphones. Thanks to them, they sent me a product bundle that has just elevated the content of this podcast and show. As you can see, the video quality is incredible now. They sent me a Logitech Stream Cam. For audio, they sent a Blue Yeti microphone. I already had one, but now I have two, which will enable me to do in-person interviews and other things like that. And also they provided this Logitech Gaming Pro X headset to have as just a great pair of headphones to use for the podcast, but honestly, I'm going to use it for my own personal work and games as well. So really appreciative of them. Go check them out on their website, logitech.com. bluemicrophones.com, and I think Logitech G or Logitech Gaming. You can find them on social media, and I'm just really grateful for them, and please support their products. Awesome. So just moving on, one topic I wanted to talk to you about is conference talks, and I feel like you've had a lot of experience talking. You've done a GDC panel. You just came off of a Geekle Global Game Dev Summit talk a few weeks ago.
We both did.
Yeah, we both did. So that's how we connected, and that's how this conversation came about. But I thought your talk was really cool. So anyone interested can go find that. It was really easy to find on your website, your Linktree website, which I've linked below. But you did a really great job of explaining what technical design is and how like it separates. And I'd highly recommend people just going there if they want to learn more about technical design, because I don't think it's worth you repeating a lot of that stuff here. But one question I did want to ask is just through your speaking journey, and this is kind of a selfish question as well, what has been your kind of process for finding topics that you think are worth talking about and preparing those talks and those slides and things?
Yeah, I would say that my journey started as a result of the pandemic. Just turned out to be a lot of opportunity and low barrier of entry to be able to scale the knowledge and experience from the comfort of your home in front of your computer, the same way that we do Zoom meetings, right? If after all these conferences started going virtual and you don't have to travel and you don't have to speak in front of a large room of people, I was like, oh man, this is easy. Like I could do this. Let me put some pitches together. And so after you realize that, it totally ends up being, okay, what am I going to say? Who am I going to say it to? And why should people care? And always keep in mind that you're probably competing with a bunch of other submissions, right? So much like anything, when you're making a game, you're making a product, do some research to see what the years before have spoken about, what is most well received, right? I think for what we do, I know that my experience is design focused, and then if you want to kind of break that even more fine or more granularly, I have a lot of experience in AI and I have a lot of experience in tech design. And then I'm also kind of passionate about making game developers see their nice 401k retirement plan at like 60, 65, right? Like I want to make sure that we can persist and live long in this industry and flourish with all the amazing technology that comes up. So um, I say, always start from what you know,
Mm.
do your research to see what has already been said and see if you can bring any unique perspectives to it. And luckily for me, the tech design space is pretty unexplored. Funny enough, man. Like, I mean, it's a young role compared to some of the other disciplines, but not that young. Like
Mm.
an experienced designer is much newer than a technical designer in some spaces,
Mm.
but uh
Hmm.
and go from there. Fortunately, a lot of opportunity in the pandemic, and the more you do, it's a pretty interesting flywheel. Like the more you do and the more you get out there, the more people kind of throw opportunity at you and like, hey, saw your thing. Would you like to do
Mm.
one for us? Or and if you're worried at all, I think a great starting point is kind of at the college university level, right? Like go
Mm.
back to your alma mater and see how you would speak. What are the things you wish you knew as a student when you were at the
Mhm.
school wanting to do the thing? What would you go back and tell yourself, right? And then start at that layer, and then that kind of helps seed the foundation for like, okay, now you're talking to experienced people. What have you learned that you wish you knew when you were at that level, kind of
Totally.
thing?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's a great piece of advice. That's how I started. Was just I didn't go to university for game design, but my local university, I connected with the lecturer there, and she reached out asking if I'd talk to her students just about working in the industry, because that's so valuable for students to hear. So yeah, definitely get in touch with your local courses like game dev courses and universities that have like game dev studies. Um, and yeah, no, that's really great advice. Talking about like that same thread, how would you apply that to getting into the industry? Like, so I guess my first question I want to ask is, what was your first job in the industry, and if it was midway, and what advice would you give for people wanting to kind of take that leap to getting into that studio atmosphere, like you did back then?
Okay. Yeah. So it was midway was my first shot, my first chance.
Mhm.
Had to completely relocate to a part of the world I never knew.
Wow.
But the good thing was it was midway. It was a name I recognized, and we all knew kind of Mortal Kombat and and
Mhm.
and these games. Um, so I guess speaking to anyone just looking to break into kind of AAA studio
Yeah, I mean, it is a pretty
style.
broad question, isn't it? Well, so if you could just talk, I think your story, hearing your story, I think would be valuable enough. So, like, what did you study? Did you study, and how did that lead to you finding the opportunity at Midway?
Sure. Okay, I'll try to go through this. Try to go through this quickly. Played a bunch of video games, and eventually, when I got to uni, where I figured out that maybe computer engineering sounds cool and unique and is not too saturated, and then found that my acumen came more in computer science, which is kind of the software side, coding side, than it is the engineering side, which is kind of science heavy. And I was pretty good at math, but some of the hardware aspects, especially electrical engineering aspects, in a
Mm.
in a traditional 300-person lecture hall environment, just was kind of like was not my speed at all.
Yeah.
Um, and so eventually, back in the day of gaming magazines and EGMs and Game Pros and Game Informers, one of the game development schools that were popular at the time, this was like 2000, early 2000s, was Full Sail University in
Mm.
Florida. So by way of the gods and fortune and destiny and all that, and you know, uh, luck, luck is always a good friend on your good friend to have. I ended up there because their game development curriculum was essentially a computer science degree behind the veil of games, right? So it was totally my speed, and you take anything, the hardest thing about education is making sure that you're engaged with it. So as long as it's presented behind something that you're interested in, you will get it, right? Or you'll figure out like this is for you, this is not. And I already figured out the computer science part was for me. Got through that accelerated curriculum, right? They do kind of 21 months, 1 month classes, right? And just kind of go. So that speed of keeping things fresh, and you're constantly learning and applying, and it's very hands-on, right? You do like half the day theory, half the day hands-on. Helped it sink in. Made it through the skin of my teeth, or whatever the saying is. And I had developed a pretty good relationship with my then career development advisor, Rob Coble, who I was at his door pretty frequently. Like, hey, you said give you a resume. Okay, here's a resume. Hey, you said to check up on you every week. All right, I'm checking up on you every week, right? Just kind of repeating the words of wisdom he kind of gave to our classes as we were kind of finishing up. And at the time, Midway was doing a lot of recruiting from the campus. I guess they, thankfully to the people that came before me, they had a pretty good success ratio of like, oh man, we can throw these guys with zero experience at Unreal and they'll kind of pick it up and make things happen. Okay. They came back for another recruiting round. Rob Coble put my resume on top of the stack. I'll say this, I do remember this. I wish I had a picture of it because I don't have it anymore. I had my resume designed like a Game Boy DS.
Nice.
If you could imagine what that looks like.
Yeah.
So, I try to make it visual. Like it always pains me a little bit inside when I see someone apply for a designer or like some type of aesthetic role and you see kind of white text and bullet points. It's like, come on, man, but that happened, and the interview was really amazing, Carl, because by this time I had trained kind of everything in logic and computer science and coding. So I was ready to talk about like, loops and data structures and memory management and things like this. And this was Harvey Smith at the time. He's now doing like I think Redfall, and he's known for Dishonored these days. But he's been in it since Thief and Ultima and things like this. And he's sitting across from me. He's throwing questions at me that are like, hey, design an elevator system. And and he's like, hey, talk to me about like why Batman's a cool character. And so these just like great open-ended questions where you just kind of forget you're on an interview and you're just like, oh yeah, sure, man. Like Batman's awesome because he's does whatever he wants. He has a badass car, right? And kicks ass. So those are what you find out is that those are kind of very designer oriented questions to see how you think, see how you break apart a problem, see how you collaborate, see if you're in tune with kind of the mass market. And fortunately, man, I said enough things that were not too horrible that got me at the on-site interview, got me to fly out. I got to see the studio, which for a 22-year-old kid,
huge.
Oh my gosh, man, like ping pong tables and Street Fighter machines and I'm used to working on like one screen, probably back in those days, right? It was like a CRT big ass monitor and like my Pentium 2 with whatever RAM and like third hand-me-down video card. I'm like, all right, this is awesome. And you get to this professional environment, man, and some of these, now you see these Twitch streamers and all that top of the line rigs. That's what it was at a game studio. Plus the development kits, you're just like, holy cow, this is
Smash
like
at lunchtime.
Oh yeah, yes. And Rock Band was heavy at the time.
Nice.
And it just felt like you walked into like Minority Report, right? Like, oh shit, so cutting edge, top of the line. But what I will say to people that are looking to break in, right? If it involves these days, I think there's no excuse for you not downloading Unreal or Unity and building something and then putting it online and getting feedback on it and having people download it. There's nothing that replaces that. The second part, I think that goes without saying, I think that I would share is run to that whiteboard, man. Like a lot of people are visual, and it's hard to kind of walk someone through a train of thought verbally.
Mm-hmm.
So run to that whiteboard. And in these days, I think Zoom has like annotate or something. So open up like a Google drawing and annotate and draw shapes and flow charts and point arrows and copy and paste pictures, because that's the way that we work now. You know, all I really look for, if someone has no experience and hasn't done anything, I just want to be able to see if we can communicate with one another a train of thought and how receptive you are to something that's brand new, and that we can kind of break apart a problem to a very digestible set of things. But, you know, build things yourself, because then that kind of gives you some ground to speak on and some problems that we can vibe off of. And, you know, it's always intimidating, but what's clear is generally excitement and passion and enthusiasm. And generally on an interview, I'm just trying to find what is the thing that you're enthusiastic about, and let me unlock that. And then we could start riffing. And then I could start throwing hard questions at you to be like, okay, this is the thing I see that you are very excited about. And that one bullet point on your resume that's actually true. Like, let's talk about that now.
Yeah. No, that's really amazing advice. Even just you speaking about it, I could feel that passion, and that you're kind of like need to want to get that human to human kind of connection, which I think is really important. You did a really great job of making that clear. So anyone listening, you know, about that, like confidence, you know, you are going to be nervous. It is going to be hard, but just go for it, and just trust that like once you jump into the pool, it will get easier the more you do it. And yeah, just try to be as human as possible. Be creative in your resumes, make them colorful, which is a really good point. I want to throw you a question that I didn't prep you for, but I just want to, I don't know, I feel like you're going to do a good job of answering it. In your podcast, Out of Play area, can you tell me one story that you've learned this year from one of your guests that you think is that's been transformative that you'd like to share?
Carl, that's amazing. By the way, I'm going to rebrand Out of Play area to the West Coast Zero to Play podcast. I think that's what I'm going to rebrand it to. That's awesome. Yeah, man. I think today is episode 17 of my season 1. Nice. So what's a great story that has been transformative? Hearing from my guests. Damn, man, there's been a lot of, you know, you've done this for long enough.
Totally. Everyone's different.
There's great little anecdotes. I think
just one guest that you you know, you just really admired, and could be a good episode for people to jump into, coming from this one to go check out.
Yeah, I would say a good buddy I work with at Rockstar San Diego. We worked on Red Dead Redemption together. His name is Ben Johnson. He goes by Benja, his online moniker. And he has a great story of his first foray into the industry, right? He's a creative soul, man. Like, it's just an awesome person to hear speak about his experience. He has a great story of how one of his first interviews was at 3DO in the Bay Area in San Francisco, right? 3DO's OG, right? This is some of the early stuff, like the 3DO Interactive, right? Like one of the first CD-ROM consoles. Wow. And I remember him telling me that he was interviewing with a gentleman by the name of Howard Scott Warshaw. And if you Google this gentleman, you'll see his history. And he's talking to this guy, and he's running through the gamut, you know, what we call the interview gauntlet, right? Like, people are just trying to throw questions at you about whatever problems they're facing to kind of gauge if you can do the job or not. And they're having, you know, the way he tells it is how, you know, it's a tough interview. He's not really doing well. He feels like he's floundering, you know, just trying to stay above water. And then at some point it clicks in his head that he knows this guy. He knows Howard Scott Warshaw. And it's like, how the hell do you know him? And he read a book that he wrote called Conquering College. And on the back of the book, right, or the sleeve, it's a picture, right? Headshots, right? Clean shaven. They don't look at all like we actually look in real life.
Yeah.
So in real life, he was like bearded, grizzled, game developer. He's like, holy shit, you're the guy that wrote Conquering College. And as soon as he told that, Howard turns around. He's like, wait, you read my book? Like, you young whippersnapper, like, you actually read these days and you read my book? And he's like, holy shit. And he like, the way he tells it, he like opens the interview door, goes back to the floor, tells his team like, yo guys, this guy's read my book. I told you my book is awesome. Come check this out. Come. And he brought the whole team back into the room and they're talking about his book and his insights and what he learned. And at that point, it wasn't an interview anymore. It was like, hey, you're one of us.
Your
Come
family.
with us to the floor, see the game. What do you think of this? Oh, play this level. What do you think of that? Right. And I think that's
wow.
We're trying to do, right? We're just trying to find the fit for you as a person into our family. Right? I don't want to use the word family loosely, but really, there is an aspect to that.
Really, really good point. Yeah, and that's all about that human to human connection again. Like you can teach a lot of skills. Like the world, especially game development, is evolving with the tools and the engines and what's possible every year. And it's just about finding the people that you connect with, you jive with, and that you want to spend every day on this journey together with. That's a really good point. That's a cool story. I love it.
I laugh so hard, man. I laugh very hard. I'm hearing. Yeah, you got to hear it through his words and his voice and his excitement.
Oh, that's awesome. So I have probably about 20 other questions that I want to ask you about your job and your past and just your mindset and things like that. But I think that's all the time that we've got for today. But I have loved your energy. I've loved the advice you've given. I've loved all the insight you've shared about your job and the ins and outs of being a technical game designer. So thank you so much for your time, John. If anyone listening is interested in following your journey, they can find you on Twitter at lkingpin, ELKINGPIN. And then there's a Linktree website there where you can find all of his resources for his talks, and other links that he finds important. His LinkedIn page as well, John R. Diaz. And I do really appreciate your time, and I'm glad we made this work. Thank you so much for chatting to me and being on the show. And is there any kind of last point that you'd like to end the show on for any aspiring technical game designers that could be listening and could want to follow your path one day? What would you like to say to them?
Carl, I'll say that this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. The time flew by. You're a really amazing host. A good host kind of ninja deceptively kind of masks that this is actually an interview when in reality it just felt like a conversation. So what I would love to impart on any aspiring tech designers really is, if you haven't done so already, is dive into, download any tool set. I would recommend Unreal, but feel free to do it in Unity. Download it and take a game that you really love. Hopefully not an MMO or a Grand Theft Auto, but if so be it. If you want to bite that, if you want to bite that chunk off, or you want to bite, hey, I want to make Fortnite, right? Like, okay, pick a game you really like, download a tool set, and then use the vast resources of YouTube and try to replicate one aspect that you see. And if you stick with it for longer than a month, then reach out to me and let's talk about what the next steps are, where maybe I can point you to figure out the path that is right for you, right? To see what aspect of whatever part of making the thing you just made is the right way, right? Because a lot of us kind of start out thinking we're going to be one thing and end up being something else, right? I thought I was going to be a tools programmer and ended up being a tech designer. And a lot of people get into design and end up really ending up to be like an animator or something like that, right? So happy to make myself available to you. But yeah, download it and make it, because I want to keep playing new games from different people's perspectives.
Yeah. Totally. One fact is Fortnite only came out like 5 years ago, and whenever I like learn that, it just blows my mind just how much that's in like affected culture is insane. So there's games being made today that are gonna change the world in a few years' time. We just don't know about them yet.
Hey, yep, you said it. And Roblox too, man. Roblox is making its own universe.
Totally. Thanks for your time, and all the best. Have a good rest of your day.
You as well, Carl. Take care, man.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I hope you learned something about game development, the games industry as a whole, or the future of games. You can follow us on Twitter at Zero to Play, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, or any other podcasting service. Other than that, you can find links to this episode down in the description below, and I'll see you guys next week for the next episode.